So, I want to talk about kind of the futures of both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. So people who are conservative, people like me, will look at the Democratic Party and we'll say, it looks, frankly, like they're in a heap of trouble. It looks like the people who are the supposed moderates are falling to the wokes. I mean, Joe Biden being just a perfect example of this. He's just saying things from his face hole that he clearly does not understand, but he's been told by his advisors who are very online that this is stuff that he should say. It feels like the older guard of the Democratic Party is now kind of squiring around a far more radical young guard that is kind of using them in order to achieve mainstream status. And then people on the left, they'll look at the right and they'll say, you guys are becoming ever more extreme. You're a Trumpist party. You're a party that refuses to acknowledge the results of elections. Do you think that there is, let's go party by party. What do you think the future of the Democratic Party is? Do you think that there is going to be any sort of backlash here, a rising wave of people who say, enough is enough. Let's get back to the brand of sort of almost John Edwards-esque, mainstream populism that was the bread and butter of Bill Clinton or the Democratic Party for years and years?
Well, I think one of the major underreported stories in politics in the last 20 years or so has been the dramatic shift in the makeup of the Democratic Party, where their base is. If you look at the last time I looked at this, I think 41 of the 50 wealthiest congressional districts in America had Democrats in those seats, and I think it was all of the top 10. And if you go back as recently as 1992. It probably would have been more like a 50-50 split or even a 60-40 split in favor of Republicans. This idea that your affluent upper-class suburb is now, near somewhere between a 70 and 90% Democratic vote in most places. That's a dramatic shift in the composition of the Democratic Party. I think this goes back even before Clinton. I think it goes back to 84 after Walter Mondale, when the DLC stepped in and said, we can't have unions being, the main supporters of the party anymore. We have to get away from that. We have to have more of a pro-growth strategy. And they lost touch with people who were shipbuilders or who had, manual labor jobs or work construction. Like there are no people like that who rise within the Democratic Party anymore. They don't know what ordinary people think about, what they're like, and so I think that's a huge problem for the party, that there's no feeder system that brings in people who, in the past might have come from unions. Those people just, they're not there anymore.
I mean, one of the things that brings up is the fact that it seems like when you look at it economically, it makes no sense, right? From an economic perspective, if supposedly the Republicans are the party of free markets and big business and all the rest of this, why are all these affluent areas going blue and all of the lesser affluent areas are starting to trend red, even including in many Hispanic districts now? Even the black vote is starting to move a little bit away from the Democratic Party. It used to be like a 90 to 95% black vote for the Democratic Party. Now it seems to be moving into sort of like the 85 to 90% range in a lot of these polls, maybe even 80 to 85%, which is just the death knell for the Democratic Party, demographically speaking. If you look at it from a pure sort of either Marxist perspective or a pure, economically conservative perspective, the economics don't tell the whole story. There is a culture war here that is happening. And I think people in the media refuse to acknowledge the culture war because they're such participants in it that the other side doesn't exist. But it shows you that what Trump really was a giant middle finger to the institutions, but he was also saying to a bunch of people who'd been attacked by the cultural institutions as regressive and non-tolerant and bitter clingers. He was saying to them, no, there are a lot of people out there who are exactly like you. And look at me, I'm a New Yorker. I don't even agree with a lot of the stuff that you guys believe socially, but I'm going to treat you with a certain level of baseline respect as a human being. And a lot of people went, wow, that's kind of a refreshing prospect. I mean, you're not even like Mitt Romney from Bain Capital telling me this. You're somebody who has that. I mean, it was such a weird thing to get it from Trump because he is an elite by every standard, by every economic standard, by every educational standard, but he didn't play like that. He played like Archie Bunker more than he played like Mitt Romney did, even though he's much more like Mitt Romney in terms of, personal, economic lifestyle than Archie Bunker. That social battle, that seems to be the most telling part of the modern political discourse. And maybe the current conflict is not predominantly about economics. It's about levels of respect for people who actually have different values than your own.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. Another major underreported story was one you just referenced, which was the fact that in 2020, the constituency that really elected Joe Biden was white guys. Donald Trump actually outperformed his expectations from 2016 with every other demographic, including women, including black women, black men especially, Hispanics. And what does that tell you? That tells you that, that there's something that's more important to these voters than what the traditional mainstream media would have you believe. I mean, I think there's a widespread belief among people in the press that if you're black, you just automatically are going to vote Democratic because that's what you do, right? Like civil rights issues or, George Floyd, that's the most important thing to you. Well, not necessarily. Like people are different. That's one of the things you learn as a campaign reporter is that there's a million reasons why people vote for people. They're all over the map. When I covered Trump, I had people who were far to the right who said things that were kind of deeply offensive to me on the race front, and then I had other people who were like just elderly ladies from Cincinnati who said, yeah, I really liked his TV show, and like there are different reasons why people vote for people. You can't just make assumptions, and when you see those statistics, I think there is something going on there where there's a battle between sort of ordinary people, working class people, middle class, formerly middle class people who just don't see their values reflected in like the mainstream press and from prominent Democratic Party politicians. And I think they're defecting, and that's a big problem for the Democrats.
So let's shift to the other side of the aisle. So obviously you're still somebody who identifies as liberal. I don't know how you vote now because it's sort of, I would assume heterodox, it sort of depends, but you can tell me sort of, if you're comfortable with that, how you voted in recent elections or maybe not.
I didn't vote last time.
Yeah, okay, fine. So, you look at the Republican Party, what direction do you think the Republican Party is moving in? Because there is this huge internecine war, Trump, non-Trump, nationalist, conservative versus libertarian. Like, where do you think the party is going there and what are the big problems facing it?
Well, I think the Republican Party is in an interesting spot because of the incompetence of the Democratic Party. There are all these doors that are open to them that have never been open to them before. You mentioned before that the conservatives never won the cultural war before. It was never even an option. They were always dominated on that front. Well, that's not true anymore. Like there are issues where Republicans can win. Particularly on things like free speech and the civil liberties, right? Like they can represent themselves as champions of that. However, I think that happens to be undercut when you pass laws banning certain kinds of speech, in some places. There are different laws, like, some of these responses to CRT and to trans care. I think there are different approaches that they could take that would allow them to still be champions of free speech and to also stand up for their values there. But yeah, I think that's a major dividing line within the Republican Party is do we want to be kind of traditional libertarians and laissez-faire capitalists, or do we want to be something else? And I don't think they've settled on the formula yet. I'd be interested to hear what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a lot of appetite for the culture war right now by the right because the left has pushed so far. And so things that were not even considered remotely controversial 5 seconds ago are now considered wildly controversial. So I'm a very pro-free speech person. I also am not in favor of public schools teaching kids sexual orientation at the age of 5. Right. I just don't think that that's an appropriate thing. And so, I think that that's the left, by pushing so far. My theory basically here is that liberals got so successful in the culture war that they didn't know when to just say, okay, we got most of what we wanted, and now we're just going to sit here for a little while. It turned into, what's the way that we get our base out? And the way we get our base out is we have to have the next civil rights movement, right? We had Black Americans, excellent civil rights movement. Now we have gay Americans. That's the next round of the civil rights movement. And then it turned into men who believe that they're women. And people started to go, well, hold up just 1 second. Now you're running up against some actual hard realities. And when you start saying that, it's not just that we want gay and lesbian Americans to be able to live as they wish to live in a free society. We want to mandate that your children learn about that value system from a public school teacher, and that your business have to basically enforce anti-discrimination laws that we feel are appropriate. I think you're now entering, it went from leave us alone in the privacy of our home to you will do what we want or we will burn you to the ground. And when that happened, I think the right was suddenly left with this huge swath of land that it could claim, which was, we'll leave you alone, but you guys got to leave us alone. And the fact that you haven't left us alone means that we can now fight back. Now, I think there's a danger that the right will go too far and that the right will start saying, okay, we're going to carry this flag all the way back to the top of that hill. I don't think that's where things are going. But the fact that the left has become so wildly radical on this stuff, so many of the predictions that a lot of people were making about where same-sex marriage would end up, which were seen as completely outlandish when these predictions were made in 2004, 2005, are now being effectively advocated by the White House. And that's, I think, given a lot of ground to conservatives and to moderate people. I mean, the so-called Don't Say Gay bill in Florida is widely popular with Democrats in the state of Florida.
Right.
Because, again, it was targeted at, you don't get to do this to kids. You want to do this when you're an adult? Fine. You don't get to do this to kids. And the left just pushed too far. So I think that that's going to be fertile ground until it isn't. And I think that may be the message of the politics right now. Everything is fertile ground until the moment you push too far, in which case it becomes incredibly inhospitable.
Yeah, and just quickly, I covered the Virginia governor's race and, the election of Glenn Youngkin. And Democrats traditionally have held anywhere from a 20 to 30 point lead on the education issue. It's one of the reasons that they've always done so well in congressional races, because this was an issue where they were overwhelmingly trusted more than Republicans were. And, what I saw just in that one county in Virginia, Loudoun County, was this dramatic change in where people felt that the politicians were that they could trust. They saw the local Democratic Party infrastructure as being on the side of this sort of non-transparent cabal that was trying to impose something. And the fastest way to lose support is to get between parents and their kids. And I think you see that in places all over the country where, now if you look at the polls, that once 30-point lead, and that wasn't that long ago, that was in the Obama years, it's evaporated to 3 or 4 points. And I think it's going to keep going in that direction unless they fix it.
So, Matt, you're living in New Jersey. You're apparently outside of some of the big population centers in New Jersey. How is that treating you, and what do you see as the future of that state? I have a sister who literally just moved from New Jersey down to Florida. So I guess the question is to all freedom-loving people, when do you leave the Northeast?
Well, I was born in New Jersey, so and I grew up in the Northeast, so this is kind of home to me. We're probably going to stay. I think some of the issues that we've talked about today, my town is now involved in. There's a lawsuit that's just been filed in our town about some of these things. So it's interesting. I think it's a great place to raise kids. If there isn't a whole lot of drift that goes on in the public schools. I haven't seen it yet because my kids are too young, frankly. But apparently some of the parents in the town where I live are upset, and I just haven't gotten to that yet.
So now I'm going to ask you to do some rank 2024 political punditry. So the sort of prevailing wisdom is that it's going to be an octogenarian off, that it's going to be a no longer with us Joe Biden against the revitalized Donald Trump, that Trump is going to walk away with the nomination in 2024. I got to say, I'm increasingly skeptical of that narrative, that is how things are going to play out on both sides of the aisle. Just looking forward, how do you think Biden runs again? Do you think Trump wins the nomination? Where do you think this goes?
I find it hard to believe that they would conclude that Biden could actually do a campaign. He looks like he's physically having difficulty executing his office right now. And there's already been, lots of rumors about this internecine warfare between Harris and Buttigieg over who's actually going to run within the Democratic Party. When you start seeing news stories like that pop up, that usually means it's a trial balloon that somebody in the party is sending out there to see how the public's going to react to the idea of Biden not running again. So it's an open question. As far as Trump goes, one thing I will say is the media is desperate for Trump to run. They may kick and scream and they may say this is the worst thing that would ever happen to America. But I guarantee you CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, Washington Post, they're all down on their hands and knees every night praying that Donald Trump runs and wins the nomination because, look, they made more money than they ever made in their entire lives. This was a dying business until he came along, and they would see it as a godsend if he ran again.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I also think that the biggest enemy of Trump is not the media, it's Trump, meaning that his biggest friend is the media because the right has become so reactionary in our attitude toward the media that the minute that the media declares someone bad, we declare them good. So if they attack Marjorie Taylor Greene, then we'll be, oh, well, she's probably great at her job. She's like amazing. And it's like, you never spend 5 minutes actually like looking at, well, maybe, some stuff she says is true, but maybe some stuff she says is just crap. And it feels like the same. I understand the congenital predisposition to decide that whatever the media says, we have to do precisely the reverse. But that also allows the media to pick your nominee. And I agree with you. I mean, I don't just think that they make a lot of money off of Trump. I think that they believe, based on the last election cycle, that Trump may be the only person alive that Joe Biden can beat. That if there's any other candidate who is not Joe Biden, that is not Donald Trump, that Joe Biden is going to have a very difficult time on his hands beating that person. I mean, if you're a conservative and somebody asks you, who do you think that the Democrats would rather run, Trump or DeSantis? You're hard pressed to say that they wouldn't rather have Trump to run against. I mean, they have a track record of at least doing pretty well against him in 2020, no matter what you think of how the election played out. It gives them a lot of fodder. And Trump makes it easy for them in the sense that he's focused on 2020, right? Like if it's DeSantis, you can't talk about January 6th and 2020 the whole time. Right. DeSantis just be like, right, and moving on. But if it's Trump will just jump right in there because that's what Trump cares about. It's clearly what gets his motor running. He gets up every morning thinking about how he was jobbed in 2020. And if the election turns into a relitigation in 2020, I think the Republicans actually could lose it.
Yeah, the whole question is whether it becomes a referendum on Trump or whether it becomes a referendum on the Biden administration. The Republicans, if they can turn it into a referendum on the Biden administration, they're probably going to win. Frankly, yeah. If they have to defend January 6th and Trump and everything that Trump has ever said, that makes it considerably more difficult for them. So I think you're right about that. In their deepest, darkest hearts, the heads of the DNC, I think they would dread running against somebody like DeSantis. Depending on how things play out between now and then, but clearly. And we're probably going to see this in the midterms coming up. They have an accessibility problem with Middle America that they thought that they had solved with Biden, and clearly they have not.
Yeah, and as for Biden, by the way, I think that they can't afford not to have him run because yes, he's dead, but also propping El Cid on that horse may be a better solution than having a fight between a politician who, if you constructed a politician to be bad in a lab, you couldn't do better than Kamala Harris. I mean, she is truly awful at this. And Pete Buttigieg, who is a very smart person, but also has a serious connectability problem with voters who don't happen to be upper-class white liberal women from Ivy League colleges.
Yeah, I covered both of those candidates during the primary in 2020. I have to admit, the first time I saw Buttigieg, I thought, similar to my reaction to somebody like Marco Rubio, like this person, as a professional on the stump, knows what he's doing, right? Like it looks like someone who is good at this, right? Whereas Kamala Harris was just a disaster, and I kept being told whispered to by aides behind the scene that this candidate is dynamite. There's no way she can lose. You got to trust me on this. The numbers are going to bear it out. And fortunately, I didn't write any of that stuff because it turned out that and she had a couple of bites at the apple too. Like they tried to revive her in the press a couple of times, and voters just didn't go for her. And again, this just speaks to what the Democratic Party is like now. They don't understand that they think, well, this is perfect. She's got a law enforcement background. She's a woman of color. Like she's the first something. this is going to work. Why isn't this working? And it's more complicated than that. You actually have to, connect with voters, and they don't see it that way.
Yeah, I mean, that to me is the actual tragedy of Pete Buttigieg, is that Buttigieg, when he originally started, so I actually asked him on my show, and his campaign chief, he had no traction at the time. She's like, sure. And then he started to get traction, and of course it was, no, we definitely can't do that. But, it was going to be an interview like this. It's going to be friendly. We always do friendly interviews on this particular show. And the big switch for Buttigieg came when he decided that he wasn't just a very professional candidate who's obviously very bright and also was gay and married. It was that he was predominantly a gay married candidate who also happened to be all of these other things. And he started going on national television and lecturing Bible believers that the Bible mandates that you believe in same-sex marriage. And he turned into what I've said on the show as Pastor Pete. Like, it was one thing for him to say, okay, this is who I am, this is my lifestyle, this is what I do. And it was another thing for him to say, this is the core of my candidacy, is that I am a historic candidate. And so he ran to the identity politics left, and it won him admirers in the circles where people give a lot of money in the Democratic Party. But it also alienated him from an entire base of voters, which was proved out in the primaries when he basically had no voting base in the primaries.
Right, and what might have been happening there too is a lot of times, and I've covered a lot of presidential elections, the aides to a candidate will spend way too much time with reporters on the plane or on the bus, and the reporters will tell them, well, this is going to work, this is how you win a primary, on the Democratic side, and suddenly you'll see a shift in the candidate's rhetoric that turns out to be exactly the opposite of what works with audiences, And I think Mayor Pete, the first time I saw him, I thought, this might work, right? Like there's a possibility here that this is a candidate who's going to be able to speak to, broadly to the whole country in some way or the other. But I think he became convinced that he couldn't win the Democratic primary unless he leaned into, certain issues. And, they didn't work for him. So, that was that.
Well, folks, that is Matt Taibbi. Everyone make sure to check out Matt's Substack, TK News by Matt Taibbi. Always a great read. Get full access to his features, columns, and creative writing. Matt, thanks so much for joining the show. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much, Ben, for having me on. I really appreciate it.